feel free to ask any questions or raise your hand for any specific thoughts you might have over anything that we go over today. This is more for the strength and conditioning interns getting prepared to learn about evals next week, and more along the lines of like evaling for a specific purpose instead of evaling if you can't. Ooh. If you guys can't hear over here, there's a ton of room over that way too. But again, evaling for a specific purpose instead of just evaling to eval, right? So how the assessment impacts the delivery and the swing. So obviously, this is kind of what our eval looks like. This is a way better version of it, thanks to the pitching department. This is what our colleges and evals look like. So what we evaluate, obviously those who have sat on evals, pretty much everybody should know by now, we're looking for, in the office, posture, or we're looking for what the shoulder blades do when they move their hands by their side and then go overhead. We're looking for what their head does, stuff like that, right? So for us, that's the very, very baseline of theoretically how they should move when they're playing their specific sport, or whatever the task is, right? So this is a very, very low level, lift your arms overhead, and you notice that their ribs flare aggressively, and they're just like this. You could assume that when they have a baseball and they're trying to lay back, they're probably going to do it a little bit more aggressively, right? When I go hands by my side and I bring my hands over top, my shoulder blades should just go up and around. They should never pinch down first to go over top, right? So you guys went over the piece of paper that Kaylee gave you for ISA too, right? For the infrasternal angle, right? So really, really good little sheet that you guys got. So just going over it again, right? Think about if I squeeze something, like I have a tube of toothpaste, if I squeeze something in the back, the toothpaste is going to come out the front. If I squeeze it softly, it's going to come out softly. If I squeeze it really fast, it's going to come out really fast, right? So that bottle of toothpaste is theoretically your rib cage, right? Posterior and anterior, right? So if I go hands by my side and I squeeze my shoulder blades together before I go over top, and that's a very, very low level, if I squeeze my shoulder blades together, my ribs go forward, right? If I'm doing that with a baseball, because this kind of mimics the baseball position, it's going to be really, really aggressive, right? Because that's obviously a way faster movement, right? So we're taking a look at that in the office, seeing what a toe touch looks like. So the toe touch is basically, can they push or can stack as they're touching their toes? We'll talk a little bit more about how that specifically relates to like a throw or something like that later on. Looking for a rib hump, right? I don't know if you guys have seen any rib humps lately, but think about it like this, right? So everybody's learned about like this little pattern like this, right? Everybody just standing on that right hip. When I go to do a toe touch, I'm a really good example of it. If I go to do a toe touch, you can see the top of my right rib is way higher than my left, right? So my ribs are like this. This is probably a little bit aggressive, but in order for me to get to a glove side fastball, I have to be able to do this, right? So if I'm stuck here and I try to go to neutral, I'm already a little bit behind relative to this, right? This is why the eval and the specific exercises you give them are so important, because no matter what I do, unless I can compensate to get there, and it's still going to be off, I'm going to have a hard time getting my body to go like this because I'm so far behind, right? So again, those are 3 office evals, 4 office evals that kind of help you try to figure out how this athlete moves and then what to do for programming around it, right? Then we move to the table. We'll go over hip range of motion. We'll go over straight leg raise, stuff like that. Infrasternal angle, obviously you guys understand that so far. Then we'll go over shoulder range of motion, stuff like that, see how they move dynamically, right? And then that pieces together in a bubble how somebody possibly can move without some type of compensation, right? And again, compensations aren't bad. It's just more along the lines of trying to figure out more like, what can I explain to this athlete, whether I'm a pitching coach or whether I'm a strength coach, relative to trying to get everybody to throw the same way, right, or do the same way, right? Again, you can't like towel drill your way into a glove side fastball if your ribs are like this, right? So that's the importance of understanding how this is programmed. So, what range of motion do they have access to? Kind of what we talked about already. What range of motion can I access? So that's passive versus active, right? So that's like more T-spine stuff. I think this makes more sense for T-spine than any other eval that we do. mainly because like what does the straight leg raise, active or passive, make a difference, right? For me, the straight leg raise is to try to figure out where their pelvis and their rib cage is in space. A lot of athletes, as we know, are really, really good compensators. So if you have them lift their leg up and you're like, hey, I want you to do this, and all I want you to do is lift your leg up, make everything else as strict as possible, they're going to lift their leg up as high as they can, they're going to compensate, they're going to roll over, right? So for me, what I use the athlete for, the eval for, is strictly just trying to figure out where their pelvis and their rib cage is in space, and then again, why, you know, Austin's trying to have them do something and they can't do it, right? And then I try to make that change in the gym, right? So muscles react to joints rather than joints react to muscles, right? So that's more of a complex theory that you'll learn more about when you go over like ISA and IPA in more depth. And then again, like I said, where is their center of mass, right? So think about this as like a whole picture thing when we talk about the eval in a specific body, right? So everybody's heard of like the joint by joint approach, right? For the most part, right? So the joint by joint approach is a very, very like old school, like, hey, your ankle's stiff, let's do ankle mobility stuff, right? So if I have somebody who is really flat-footed and they're limited in dorsiflexion, I would assume that their center of mass is pushed forward, right? So think about like this, Jack, here real quick. So just stand here, face me. So right now, if Jack's standing still, you would just assume, if he's in a perfect posture, that his ears in line with his shoulders, in line with his hips, in line with his knees, in line with his heels, right? If I push my weight forward, what happens to my center of mass? It goes forward. What should my shin bone do, my knee bone do, my pelvis do, my rib cage do in relation to all that? And my foot. My foot's gonna collapse, right? Everything's gonna go forward, right? I'm probably gonna tilt my pelvis and I'm probably gonna arch my back. So right now, if Jack leans into me, a little bit more, just try to stay on your heels, right? So right now, his dorsiflexion is limited, right? But it's limited because that's where his posture is, right? So when you see somebody comes in like this and do the overhead squat and they're just like this, you would just assume that they're probably, again, along with everything else you just learned, their center of mass is pushed forward, right? So if you were to lean towards me, right, and then try to squat, continually pushing towards me, it's like almost near impossible, right? So that's those athletes that are very like hingy in nature when they squat. They stop at, 9 degrees, maybe a little bit above, right? So let's say I take Jack's hands and I have him lean back now, and then squat all the way down. Good, I come back up. Right, obviously that's a lot better, right? So all I did was take the joint by joint approach and just make it one massive system and either try to shift his weight forward or shift his weight backwards, right? Thank you. Does that make sense? Right, so the ankles are gonna do whatever the knees, the pelvis, and the rib cage say, right? These two are the center of everything. If these are off, there's a very, very high chance that everything else is gonna be off up and down the system. From like your wrist to your elbow, like, when you think about lower half and upper half, the knees mimic the elbows, the ankles mimic the wrists, fingers mimic toes, shoulders mimic hips, right? Obviously they don't look like each other for the most part, but what they're going to do is going to be compensating around whatever's happening closer to the midline. Cool? Questions on that? No? Awesome. So we have posture, right? So I think this one for me is probably, again, the foundation and the most important. And not everything is always going to be super correlated, like black and white, like, oh, if you're this, then you're going to be this, you're going to throw like this. But for the most part, you could probably find, probabilities. Mind you, all of this stuff, the ISA, the IPA stuff, this is for an average human being who's, males like average 5'9", 165 pounds, that sit at their desk all day, right? So that's not specific to baseball players. So you're just taking a little bit of what you're learning through the ISA and trying to piece it together for these high-level athletes that rotate and compensate to basically play their sport, right? So you have two different postures. You have a very upright posture and you have a very hunched over posture, right? And this is where you could actually mess somebody up if you don't really understand everything as a whole. Like I said, when you start thinking about the joint by joint approach. So this guy right here is probably more wide in nature, and this guy right here is probably more narrow in nature, right? And that's their blueprint, right? That's their thumbprint, right? That doesn't make them good or bad, it just makes them them. and it's a hard conversation to have with trying to change somebody or trying to keep them the same, or what do they need in the gym, or what do they need on the on the baseball field, and trying to create that program specific to them, right? So if we talk about wides, right? Wides are very upright. Their infrasternal angle is probably greater than 100. Narrows are a little bit more crunchy. They're going to be a little bit more bent over. Their infrasternal angle is going to be less than 90. All right. Both of those athletes are going to move differently in the gym. They're going to move differently on the mound. They're going to need specific things. They're going to be different relative to, again, what their range of motion says, and then how they move through like the force plates and stuff like that. So a wide ISA, right? Think about, like I talked about, not everything is one by one. Everything is a part of a whole, right? So if I flare my ribs, what happens to my shoulder blades? They go back, right? What happens to my pelvis? It tilts forward, right? And I'm going to limit myself in range of motion in these specific areas, right? So anybody understand why we do the seated upper back expansion and what you typically see the athlete that's doing that? So seated upper back expansion obviously is trying to drive airflow in the back, right? So typically athletes that are like this are going to be doing that exercise so they can get like this, right? Athletes that are like this are going to be limited in external rotation systemically through their hips and through their shoulders. The narrows are going to be more limited in internal rotation, but they're going to have a lot more external rotation and rotation, right? So think about why. If I stand like this, right, I really can't go any further unless I compensate. I'm limiting myself in shoulder flexion, and I'm going to limit myself in thoracic rotation because my joints are basically at end range rotation and they can't go any further, right? So typically you might see a guy that throws super high or they just can't move, so they just throw like this, right? The narrow is more hunched over. The Max Scherzer of the world that kind of walks like this, and obviously everybody knows he gets into like a super protracted position, right? So now think about the wide ISA, bam, trying to hit a glove side fastball, right? Go back over the shoulder positions that they're in, the scapular positions that they're in, right? If my ribs flare forward, the scapular are probably in downward rotation and depression, right? If I want to get a glove side fastball, what do I need to do? What does my scapula have to do? What does my rib cage have to do? Rib cage has to shift backwards, right? So I have to make myself a little bit more narrow in that specific instance, which then allows my scapula to ride around the rib cage, right? And then allows me to get that ball either this way, moving this way, or getting as close to that lefty batter's box as I can, right? So again, you can see how like, oh, wide ISA, you have elbow issues. Yeah, how did you know? Well, if I'm trying to throw a baseball and I need to get to this position to get my scapula right around my rib cage, I have to just hyperextend my elbow because I can't fully clear that side, right? The narrows are going to be the opposite. They're going to be a little bit more hunched over. They're going to be a little bit more rotational. They're going to have their own issues as well, right? Maybe they're going to have a hard time getting into that position, right? Or if they get into this position, they get through their lower back rather than their shoulder blades, right? So maybe those athletes need to do a little bit more bilateral rowing to get them more wide in nature, right? And then the narrow or the wide needs to be a little bit more narrow in nature when it comes to training.
So you're saying with like the widespread and the narrow, like we're essentially trying to get them to do things that they can't do naturally?
I'm trying to get him to do whatever Austin asks me to get him to do. So if Austin's like, hey, he is flawless, make sure he doesn't get hurt, I'm probably going to give him a little bit of both. If Austin's like, hey, this guy's elbow has been blown up for 5 years, we need to make him move a little bit more efficiently, I'm probably going to try to get him to move more efficiently, right? So think about everything is a spectrum, right? So performance is like about far left as you can, and then health is about as far right as you can. So the healthier I am, the less likely I'm able to throw hard, right? The better I perform, the less likely I'm going to probably be healthy. So I have to figure out, based on conversations with the pitching department, that's why we sit down on the evals with the pitching department, conversations with the other coaches, conversations with the athletes. Like if an athlete comes in and for 4 years he's had elbow pain, 5 years he's had elbow pain, I don't really care what anybody else says. My first goal is to make sure that he is able to throw a baseball for a consecutive period of time without getting hurt. So that's where all that matters is making him move better. But if Austin's like, hey, his shit is nasty, and the reason he is as good is because he can't get through his front side and the ball just takes off, I'm going to try to make sure I give him a little bit of both, but I want to make sure that he keeps whatever Austin thinks is going to get him paid. Because the goal is to get paid, right? We're just an asset into that. And if I change him, he might be worse, right? But again, there's like a health thing that's most important, right? If you're not healthy, the underlying factor is getting healthy, and then from there, you can train to perform. But no matter how unhealthy you are, you won't make a difference.
like there are wides that throw like narrows and then narrows that throw like wides. If it's a bad pitcher, then we might change it. But if they're already like a big leaguer and they're already a pro, like we're not going to change overall the delivery. So like he's not going to make huge changes to change how he like moves around, because like that's what makes him good. Like it doesn't look right, it doesn't make sense, but that's why he's good. That's why guys can't hit it. So you don't want to change everything just based on like the eyes.
So I got a good example of that then. So has anybody heard of a guy named Marcus Johnson? What do you know about anything? Baseball player, not basketball. So I've known Marcus since he was 17 years old. Went to Duke 3 years in. Was a 4th round pick by the Marlins. Gets traded maybe 2 years ago to the Rays for a big leaguer. He's been in high A. He had bone spurs removed from his elbow. It's kind of like never really felt good since. Took like a 2-year hiatus from working with me. Lives in Cali. He was in love with his girlfriend, so he had to go move back home. Even though he spent a few off seasons with me in person, with us in person. He was with me in Mass. I worked with him remote for a year before he came to Mass. And he's like this, and he's 6'5", right? But he is unbelievably elite. He has maybe 26 walks in 200 innings in all of his professional careers, only up to high A, right? So he's like big time elite. So the Rays are telling him, hey, like you need to work on your posture. You don't look very confident, right? So he's standing like this. So this entire offseason, again, we talk about bone spurs, right? He did everything he could to stand like this, right? Called me about 2 months ago, my elbow is killing me, dude. My elbow is killing me. Well, why, right? If you have a guy that's naturally like this, who's really good at getting into this position, and then you restrict him by telling him to do the exact opposite, and he's here, right? Almost to the point where he's like over-exaggerated, and he goes to try to throw the same way, what's gonna happen? Is his shoulder blade gonna be able to round the rib cage? No. When I go like that really fast, there's a distraction force, right? That's somewhat of a torn labrum. That's how a torn labrum could happen, right? Obviously going back and forward is the same thing, but when I go to release it, everything should be able to suction cup back in, and if it doesn't, it just keeps going, right? If I can't get through my front side aggressively, I just have to aggressively hyperextend my elbow. So when I met up with him, he had a lot of pain, probably more tricep tendon area. Well, of course, he's just continually jamming on it, right? So when it came to programming, and he's like, dude, I feel way better, velo's up, it's been like 2 months. Going to programming, I just try to get him to do everything that reached, right? Everything that basically brought him back to what made him really good and healthy in the beginning, right? So again, I could have been like, I agree with the Rays, we need to do more stuff like that, and I would have ultimately been programming the exact opposite way of how he's supposed to do, right? So it's not just programming the program, it's programming to be like, hey, Austin, what does he need to work on? Why is his elbow hurt? You have any videos of delivery, and you just watch and make sure that whatever their positions they're trying to get into, from either the pitching coaches or their own eyes, that they're able to get into it, and that's where, again, specific exercises come into play.
Is there like a specific narrow wide that maybe like is more, or is it like
There's like 5 billion reasons somebody gets in
or is it like more so like
Yeah, like sometimes guys throw 400 innings, you know, in a 2-year span, and they're going to get hurt. Like a lot of it comes down to like the build up, comes down to how the way they move. I think the way they move could buffer everything else. Like if somebody moves poorly and they throw a ton, like that's just a recipe for disaster. If they're weak, that's a recipe for disaster, right? So it's very specific to like a proper build up, right? Proper on ramping. How many days they throw a bullpen. Like we've had guys that are like, yeah, my elbow hurts, I throw 4 bullpens a week. It's like, no matter how good you move, that's just a bullpen, right? You know, their strength factors, like are they weak? Can they stand still without like cruising into the ground? Like there's 5 billion factors that go into, you know, if somebody gets hurt or not. But I will tell you, if I stand like this all day, my back's probably gonna hurt no matter what I do, whether I play a sport or whether I just my average Joe that just works all day, right? So this type of posture is probably more negative for a baseball player, because if I'm in this position and I try to rotate, I'm just hitting joints, right? So I think the goal is to make sure that baseball is mostly a rotational sport, and we know that like this is bad for anybody in the world. So when you see somebody like that, you have to do something about it with their program and make sure that they're not aggressively extended, right? All right, so we already talked about this before. Again, these are like perfect, like absolutely perfect situations, but baseball's not absolutely perfect, right? These are the average human, like I said, the average man is about 5'8", 5'9", 165 pounds, right? Like you haven't seen an average human in that gym in the last 3 weeks. They're all 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", right? So just understand, again, this is trying to help you understand the foundation so that you can go and ask more detailed and specific questions, right? So wide ISA, 95 degrees or more, 100 degrees or more. They have a lot more IR, internal rotation, right? Force production compared to ER. Great at producing force, but they're bad at rotating. Typically slower, center of mass is forward, and linear delivery. Remember, think about like one of these guys is going to be more like a power lifter, right? They're going to be able to move a lot of weight really, really slowly. Probably not going to be super springy. They definitely are not going to rotate because you're restricting their rotation abilities, right? So now think about how I could make somebody wide if I had somebody who was neutral, right? If I put a bar on my back, what do? I flare my ribs, right? It's a wide compensation. The more weight on the bar, the less likely I'm going to want to go like this, right? So I'm effectively restricting rotation and creating like a fake wide for somebody who's more neutral narrow by giving them like something that's going to basically drive themselves into what would be theoretically a wide, right? Narrows are going to be the exact opposite, less than 90 degrees, way more ER than IR, whatever it is. They're relatively bad at producing force, but they're typically rotational and they're very springy. Center of mass is more backwards. They're going to be more squatty. Wides are going to be more hingy, right? If I go forward, I just showed you what Jack's squat looks like. If I go backwards, I'm able to sit straight up and basically front squat without any limit, right? That's why you see athletes when they go overhead squat and they can't do it, and you put a weight in their hand, they're like, oh, I can squat all the way down. Well, what are you doing? You're just shifting their center of mass backwards. You're making them more narrow for that specific instance, right? And then they're going to be a little bit more rotational, right? So like a Scherzer compared to maybe like a compressed somebody or another who throws more straight over the top, like Chris Tillman back in. Yeah, so Pavetta's actually narrow, but he's compressed narrow. So if you watch him walk in the gym, he's like, so is Verlander, right? Like you can have a narrow that is compressed, that has wide tendencies, and it's still the same thing. So like the wide, you typically have a wide, you have a neutral, you have a narrow, and then you have a compressed narrow, because you can't compress a wide anymore, they're already compressed.
A good example too is like Tanner Houck is a hypermobile wide. Like his eval is all green and he's as wide as they come, but he says rotational as they come on the mound. So it's like you can't make a huge change. Like you started the All-Star game, we're not changing that. So
I think, yeah, but to agree with that, and then to say a side note, when I met Tanner, he couldn't do a push-up, right? So sometimes you can be hypermobile and just lose to gravity, which is why you typically see like a long, he was very long, but a typical like long arm, like he couldn't do a push-up, but he was throwing a baseball 100 miles an hour, right? So then the thought is like, if I get him stronger and I keep getting him stronger, like what does his body look like? I don't think he's ever going to throw like this, but he might be able to get his arm in a little bit of better position, right? It's not like throwing drills are going to help him. He's been throwing his whole life. Like he literally needs a good foundation of strength. I'm not even kidding you. When I started here right when he did in 2020, he could not do a push-up. And obviously every offseason he gets better, right? So
From a pitch design perspective, you get the wide or narrow certain pitches and then a level their abilities.
no. It's very dependent on like more wrist stuff than anything with us. Because you'll see wides like Tanner that cut the piss out of it, and you'll see wides that spin it clean. You'll see narrows that spin it clean and narrows that cut the piss out of it. There's not really one way.
yeah, I think we've done a little bit on wrist, but nothing like super specific because it's just hard to measure. Like how do I measure like this? I think it'd be more like a stiff or a moderate or a loose. But yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to, again, like there's no like joint by joint. It's like how does the athlete move, in general, right? Like obviously some specific deliveries are going to be more advantageous for specific throws or pitches than others.
For the compressed narrow, would you see more extreme kind of like when it comes to the ER, IR, like rotation of it would be more like, you know what I'm saying? Okay. Because you're saying a compressed narrow, so it'd be even less than 90 degrees.
Yeah, well, that'd be like just compression in general. But yeah, we'll talk about like the norms, right?
It's
Like,
not necessarily constant, like, it's more like what their grids are doing. Like their airflow is
challenge me to try to do 5 different evals at once. Again, everything for me is just like a very, very baseline of what they do, right? So, to give you a really good example, go watch Jake Clemente throw a baseball. Go on the True Media and watch him throw, right? So he's narrow, and you're like, oh, he should be able to rotate, but he's compressed, so he's like this. His ribs are like 3 or 4 inches above where they should be, right? So for me, I'm like, okay, if he's trying to rotate, and I know exactly what happens based on every piece behind that, he's like this, he's probably going to be more like this when he throws, right? So it's not like, again, it's not like X equals X. It's like I'm trying to picture all of the different eval specific, things that I've done in that first page. So like, look, that's their eval sheet. So I'm trying to figure out, are there correlations or are there outliers, right? So this, right, is gonna be limited in this. And it was pretty much like piece for piece what I expected, but I've also known him for a little while. But again, you can see a guy like this who's always trying to be a little bit more rotational. Lower back's on fire, right? Hips are on fire. Like his whole, you gotta get epidural in the middle of the year. And he went through 3 days later, right? So like, this is a guy who went to school, and typically school lifts are gonna be very compressive in nature. Let's get all these freshmen super strong. Yeah, of course it works sometimes it doesn't, and then sometimes they get hurt. Right? So I'm just trying to figure out, hey, my lower back's hurt, my hips are on fire this whole year, I gotta get epidural, history of elbow and shoulder stuff. Like I'm trying to basically on the eval figure out why, and then you go from there. But again, like super extended, like compressed narrow, limited ER. Well, if I'm like this all the time, like that would hurt my back too. And if I'm trying to rotate on that, it would hurt anybody's back. This is a wide, this is a narrow. So obviously wide, the cereal box is going to be more like the Quaker Oats. If I have them both at the top of a hill and I let them roll down, who's going to roll faster? What's going to hurt more if I stand at the bottom and I get hit by people? Yeah, it's got more force, right? Just not a lot of speed. We kind of talked about this before. So ankle mobility, T-spine rotation. If I'm shifting forward, I'm going to restrict my ability to go even more forward, right? And what's a dorsiflexion? It's going forward, right? If I shift myself backwards, I'm going to be able to go forward even more, right? So that's going to be a more narrow, who's going to have a ton of ankle mobility, be able to squat better, right? So on and so forth. If I squeeze my shoulder blades together, I'm going to limit rotation. If I go back, I'm going to open up rotation, right? We talked about hypermobile and hypomobile. So hypermobile is more space between the joints. Hypomobile is less space between the joints, right? Somewhere in between is probably the key to success, right? Tanner Houck, probably going to be super hypermobile everywhere. If I restrict space in his joints, he's probably going to be able to own positions better. He's probably going to have more consistent positions that he's going to be able to get into, right? If I'm super, super stiff, also an issue because I'm going to have no extra rate, like motion, right? The variability between the way I move is going to be very, very restricted, right? So for example, anybody see anybody in here doing like the hip distractions with the band, right? They're just trying to create space, right? Because if I don't have enough space, I'm not going to be able to move. Then when I can't move, I have to move through something else, right? So that banded hip distraction allows an athlete to create space, right? One of my favorite ones for a stiff shoulder is the 2-position band stability. Why? It's pulling me. I'm able to create space and create rhythmic states, right? If I do rhythmic states with the ball, it's the exact opposite. I'm actually restricting range of motion. So this one's probably a little bit better for a loose guy that's trying to create range of motion, and then the ball is probably a little bit better for a looser guy that's trying to restrict range of motion, right? Does that make sense? So any type of like banded distractions, you want to create space for any type of lifting is ultimately going to restrict space, right? So when we figure out who the athlete is, there's a lot of athletes that come here that I think Clemente's a good one. Were you with me yesterday with Clemente? So his average fastball was like 95, 96 this year. Probably going to be a top 5 or 6 round pick. But again, long injury history, and I was just like, hey dude, like I'm probably for the next 3 weeks while you're waiting for the draft, like I got to help you be able to throw another 30 innings in pro ball, maybe 20, 30 innings. So I'm probably going to do less things that create force or create stiffness, and I'm going to try to do more things that open up space, right? So every lower body exercise he's doing is goblet. right? Because if he's here and I go SSB, what am I doing? Same thing, right? No matter what exercise I do, I'm still going forward, right? If I go weighted jump, I'm restricting space. If I go band assisted jump, I'm creating space because it's basically accelerating, right? So Clemente's doing a lot of like movement specific lifts relative to strength specific lifts. But once I get to the off season and he's a pro guy, I'll be able to have full, off season and do what I need to do. But for this very moment, with his injury history and getting an epidural, the most important thing for him is health. Because if I can make him a little bit healthier, if I can put him in a little bit better positions, he's probably going to feel better. He might throw a little bit harder, right? Anybody know Dom Staggs? So Dom Staggs is an exact opposite example. Kid threw 200 innings, unbelievable pitcher, like really good pitcher at UCF and Stetson. 175 pounds if he's being honest, but he lies a lot. And that's probably why he doesn't throw as hard as he could, right? So for the next 2 months, I'm trying to get him as stiff and as strong as I can because he lacked that for the last few years, right? So every single year he comes in 175 pounds, 180 pounds, right? He needs to be Clemente's 6'2", 220, right? There's somewhere in between that makes sense for both of those guys. Like I just basically talked about, we got to figure out if we're going to create range of motion or if we're going to restrict range of motion, right? So this would be like the Tanner House, and then this would be more like Lizardo, right? So we talked about a little bit of this too before. So implement positions. So NSSB back squat, anything where the bar goes on my back and the weight is going to basically produce so much force. My body's going to have to produce so much force with the weight that it has to go forward. Is going to restrict rotation and external rotation, right? Anything that's the other way is going to be opposite, right? So any type of reach, straightest wall slide, and you got like T-Rex deep squat, lat stretch, cable, zercher, split squat, like those are all things that are effectively trying to shift the athlete back, create more rotation. Where the other way around, like Dom Staggs is here and he's like this, right? Clemente is like this and he's like this, right? Because they both need two different things. Counterbalance, anterior loaded, unilateral creates rotation, rotation creates rotation, right? Like I'm trying to do a ton of rotational cable rows with Clemente. 4 different settings, RDL to row, we'll go rotational row, low setting, chest height, eye height, all these different ways. Rotational cable press, rotational landmine press, right? That's going to create movement capacity, which is going to create rotation. Dom Staggs is not doing any of that. I have a 22-year-old man doing a half kneeling cable row. Why? Because all I care about is how big he gets, right? Half kneeling cable row is a very, very easy position to own. I can load that up compared to doing something with a position like a rear foot elevated, right? Or a rotational cable row, right? So you got to know the specific athlete based on their eval, what they need, and all that stuff. Anybody have any questions?
Do you go too far in the other way, or you make somebody who's really wide way too much? Do you give them space to go the other way, or how do you balance that?
What we do is we buffer. I have, on average, 4.5 months, if I'm lucky, with the minor leaguer, probably 3 with the big leaguer. I'm just trying to make sure they can go do it the next year, right? How many times do they throw a day? Like if they're throwing 2 bullpens a day, let's say, or 2 bullpens a week, let's say it's 15 to 30 pitches, and they're throwing every single day. Like I'm not going to really be able to make a change, but if I program him the exact way he moves and he's super wide, like I could definitely make him worse. But I'm just trying to buffer everything to basically make sure that they don't get hurt. Right?
It's not enough time to make a huge change.
No, but there is a lot of time to make change when you have them here for a long period of time. But basically, like pro baseball players, college baseball players, you're just trying to buffer them. But now the conversation with Dom Staggs is like, hey bro, don't go play indie ball. Let me get June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Let me get like an extended off season to put you in a really good chance, like opportunity to throw hard, right? I could make a change with Dom if he stays here for 8 months. But I probably can't make a change, like a crazy change in 3 months. But I can make a change long term in 3 or 4 months every year for 6, 7, 8 off seasons, right? It takes time. All right. This is one of my favorite videos. This is Eric Swan. Anybody ever heard of Eric Swan? This guy throws 101 miles an hour. Went to Middle Tennessee State. Just elite arm. Had a hard time figuring out where it was going.
He accidentally threw 97 his first spin here.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be 99 too and flicked. The first was 6.9.
He's very, very loose, right? But again, I'm gonna show you some pictures and you'll see like how that makes sense, right? So you can see his shoulder blades, right? We talked about scapular upward rotation, right? In order for my scalps to upwardly rotate, my center of mass has to shift backwards, right? When my shoulder blades go down, my center of mass shifts forward. When you take a look at, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but can you see the middle of his back right now? You see how it's you can see like the mid back, like the mid traps and rhomboids are a little dense there, right? So again, if they're dense and they like squeeze them together, very, very subtly my ribs go forward, right? When I go, like I said, when we go up overhead, right, center of mass has to shift backwards, the scapula is going to continually move as the arm moves. There should be no moment where the arm continues to move and the scaps stop moving, right? That's an injury history waiting to happen. So I want to tell me if you guys can see what his shoulder blades look like. Right, so did you see how they squeeze together first and then they went up overhead, right? That doesn't make sense because if I'm lifting my arm overhead, why would my shoulder blades go down, right? Everything should move together. That's a very, very, very low level motion, right? Now imagine what happens when he's trying to throw 100 miles an hour, right? It's exaggerated. Does that make sense? Right? And again, this is what makes him elite, but this is also what is creating a challenge for why he hasn't really been good. Why he was 100 miles an hour in like a 6th round pick or something, right? Because he had a hard time controlling his body and his positions were off. He's narrow. I'd imagine he's trying to teach himself how to rotate, throw more rotationally, but he's just losing the gravity all the time. And then from there, he has to go and climb, and then the ball just goes opposite of what he wanted to do, right? This is where you could get a college delivery that goes in throwing really, really hard, and then over the next 3 or 4 years through their college weightlifting program, they're changing their mechanics, they start to get hurt, and they throw way, way less, right? Because everything in college is going to be more compressive in nature. Hey, you're 18, you need to lift, you need to get big, you need to get strong, right? Like, what he needs right now, most importantly, obviously, is to put on weight and put on stiffness, but it's got to be the right stiffness. Like, he doesn't need more stiffness in this position, he's already stiff there. Like, he needs more stiffness the other way. When he goes to throw, it's a lot less here and it's a lot more here. So you could get into that position he's trying to get into, right? So yeah, I have an example of this later on. It's hard to say, but like typically if you're Jeff Peterson, right? What do we know about Jeff Peterson? Did anybody throw with him? JJ did too, right? So Jeff Peterson, super, super dense guy, walks around like this. You would assume we're trying to get him to throw like this. Torn labrum, rotator cuff surgery, so labrum surgery, rotator cuff surgery, Tommy John, bone spurs, thoracic outlet, and then on top of it, Achilles surgery, right? So like, I don't know how easy it's gonna be for him to even lift his arm overhead. Like he has actual surgical intervention that's going to create a possible restriction, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like that would be a big factor to me. It's like I'm trying to get him up here, but to be honest with you, like I don't even know if his body can physically do that because of all the surgical interventions he's gone through. Like they've actually changed the way that the ball sits on the socket. You never may be able to get him. You know? I don't think it's specific to like there's again same thing. There's 50 billion reasons somebody could throw from down here. You know. So. I don't know if there's an exact correlation, but I would typically say, especially from college guys, we see this way more than we don't. In high school guys too. Right. So think about this thought process, right? The average baseball player looks the same. They're tall and lanky, right? Are tall and lanky going to be more narrow or wide? Probably more narrow, right? Baseball is a very rotational game. So you take a narrow and you try to make him strong, and then he looks like this, right? They're still tall and lanky, and they're still trying to rotate, but you restricted their ability to rotate by making them strong, right? Very rarely do you see a guy like Dwight Howard try to throw a baseball, but everybody looks, for the most part, tall and lanky. You know, like DeGrom looks like, who's the Seattle starter that came here?
Kirby.
Yeah, Kirby. The entire pitching department minus Nate looks the exact same. Is there a coincidence that they all played baseball at high levels? No, your body pretty much puts its. You give yourself an opportunity to do whatever you want when you're younger, and then natural selection like basically takes over. Like if I'm 5'6", I'm not going to be a pitcher, right? If I'm 6'3", 280, I'm not going to be a pitcher. But everybody that comes in here looks like Dalton Biggs, looks like Austin, looks like Ryan Conroy, like they all look the same, right? Because that's the picture perfect body for baseball. Again, for the most part, there's outliers obviously, like Jose Altuve would tell me I'm wrong, right? But if you take a look at the average big leaguer, they're 6'3", 215. All right, so then this is a really good one. So this is Ben Schroeder. Obviously, you guys all know him. He is a big complainer, right? Funny guy, but came in here, no surgery, torn labrum, right? We're doing our best to make sure that he's able to do everything at a high level. He's also very loose. So torn labrum on a very loose individual is very, very challenging because number one, they don't have any stiffness, and their stability is probably coming from the wrong areas, right? Scaps, again, as I go up overhead, every time my arm moves, my shoulder blade needs to move with it. And I don't know if you can really see this. I should be able to slow it down. That's how you do it. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's a point. I'm going to try to stop it. There's a point where his arm keeps moving and his scap stops moving, right? And for somebody who's trying to get into a good position to throw, if my arm keeps moving and my scap stops moving, right, I'm going to lay back to the wrong area and I'm going to release it, and it's going to just create a massive distraction, right? So that would be, hey, like this is probably why you did that. I'm trying to create movement going up together. I'm trying to get him to show his ball size. I'm probably trying to do more ball to wall, right? Like he needs more stability and making sure that that shoulder blade gets around the rib cage, because right now he basically continues to move, and then right here his shoulder blade stops, and then he keeps going, right? A little bit of both, because I think they both have a correlation with something, right? He's a righty. So you can think about how, and this is more of a conversation you guys are going to have with, Kaylee and Ian about programming, but whatever the right side does, there's a good chance the left side's going to do the opposite, whether it's my shoulder and my hip, or my shoulder and my shoulder and my hip and my, whatever it is. Like if I stand like this, right now I'm supinated on this right side, but I'm pronated on this left side, right? So sometimes looking at everything as a whole is way better than just looking at one side, because the whole picture can give me more of an understanding for that one specific side. All right, so really, really good conversation I had this year. I've been working with this kid since he was, I think, either senior or junior in college or just got drafted. I think he's probably third year in the pro ball. Unbelievable power hitter, Zach Acosta, all right? He's about my height, probably a little bit bigger, right? I think his first 2 years in pro ball, he had like 15 and 17 home runs each, right? Trying to talk, he was like, hey, I did the motor preference stuff. What do you think about that? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I think it's kind of eye-wash. He's like, well, why? And I said, did it give you a solution to what to do? And he goes, no. And I go, okay, well then that's the problem, right? So you dome yourself up trying to figure out like how you hit without trying to figure out a solution, right? So without even seeing him hit, just looking at the way he moves and those, he's a lefty swinger, lefty thrower. 35 degrees and 45 degrees of T-spine rotation. Would you assume that he's got a really long, pretty swing, or would you assume it's going to be a little bit more like Chase Utley's swing, very short and compact? It goes, I have a ton of rotation. What are you talking about? I go, dude, you have rotation capacity in rotation force in the capacity you have. You are extremely limited in thoracic rotation. So of course, if I have less range of motion, I'm going to be able to produce more force within that range of motion, right? If I have too much, I might be too slow, right? This works for me. The only problem is, as you see that swing, everybody here's a pitcher. If you're a righty and he's a lefty swinger and you're a righty pitcher, and you watch that swing, what do you throw into him every single time? Up and in or low and away. And when he never figured that out, obviously he's struggling, right? Let's say, hey, I wanted it, the guy comes in like this, he's super limited in rotation. He's like, and my back hurts throughout the year. I was like, yeah, obviously, right? Like, I don't even know that, but I know that based on how you stand. Give him more straight sides, give him more reaching. You need to get him out of this position to get him to get that way, right? That's not something that you could do with a bat. If you get a heavier bat and a longer bat, yeah, sure, whatever. Its swing didn't change, that you just cheated for it. So your programming needs to make sure that it's specific to what he needs in that swing. So he needs a little bit more rotation. He needs to be able to get his hands away, right? And hands away is what? Ribs back, right? Just like hands away here is ribs back. When I'm swinging, hands away is also ribs back. But thankfully, a lot of the pitchers in pro baseball don't know what ISA is because they would get them out every time, right? Because it's just, you just throw a changeup away or high end fastball and you just can't get there, right? Does that make sense? Serrated slides, deep squatting, shifting your weight backwards, counterbalance, anterior loaded, landmine, goblet, right? Any of that stuff. Anything like this, it's going to get him balls on his feet and he's going to restrict himself from rotating even more. Yeah, sure, maybe he'll be able to hit the ball, 10 feet further, but there's going to be a really, really high chance he's not going to be able to hit that outside pitch. So I'm just throwing it every time. All right, let's skip to this part. We only have like 6 minutes. So how do we know all this works, right? We are just as much strength coaches, or just as much biomechanical pitch coaches as the pitching coaches themselves. Obviously, they know more specifics about, what the ball does, the analytics side. But I think we can make the change along with them, probably a little bit more faster and efficiently than like a pitching coach that's like, hey, you stand like this, let's do tower throws. This is one of Eric's favorite articles, also one of my favorite articles. Years ago, 52 firefighters, 2 training methodologies. So a movement guided group, which is like functional training. It's like all the coaches are here teaching somebody how to do a stack pelvis and rib cage reverse lunge, right? And then you have a conventional fitness group, which is like, let's say like CrossFit or F45. It's like, hey, we're just gonna rip weights for 45 minutes and you're gonna sweat, right? You had a control group that did nothing. They had a fitness evaluation. So fitness evaluation is everything you guys learn in college and like the, anatomy and physiology, like lab classes. It's heart rate, it's VO2 max, it's blood pressure, it's oxygen levels, all that stuff that's related to actual health. And then they had a movement assessment. So the movement assessment is climbing a ladder for this specific instance for firefighters. So climbing a ladder, and then what their knee and their lower back did as they were climbing the ladder, right? So frontal knee kinematics is moving side to side. So when they climbed the ladder, did their knee cave in? Was it wobbly? And then 3D lumbar spine is just a 3D angle. Like, did it rotate? Did it dip forward? Did it dip backwards? Like, where was it at in space? And what they found was obviously both groups got drastically healthier, but the movement guided group, so the group that was coached by all of our coaches in here, we never coached them. I'm saying you guys as the example for how important you guys are really in there. The movement guided group exhibited significant improvements in spine and frontal knee plane motion when performing transfer tasks. They were taught how to do a split squat the right way. It directly correlated with the way that their knee moved and was stable when they walked up the ladder. These findings suggest that placing, and these are quotes from the article, they're not my quotes, right? These are quotes from the research article. These findings suggest that placing an emphasis on how participants move, or their execution from coaching from you guys, while exercising may be an effective strategy for eliciting a behavior change beyond the gym environment. How do I know this works? I did it with my brother, probably close to 10, 12 years ago, right? 6'3", 195 pounds as a freshman, super low right shoulder, right? When he goes to stand, or he goes to throw a baseball, what do you notice? Right shoulder is lower, right? Why need you to keep your shoulders more upright? When you walk in like that, it's near impossible, right? I trained him 6 days a week. He did not work with a pitching coach. He threw in a game once a week with my buddy who was the Legion coach. Didn't say a word to him at all, not one time. All I did was just have him work with a PRI specialist and then had him lift the right way based on the positions. And over a 10-week span, he changed without anybody saying anything to him, right? Most people know how to get in positions that they want to get into. They just physically can't get into it. that's a low right shoulder, right? Or it's like this, something or another. This is where the eval comes into play, trying to figure out where they're at. Those are same videos, just a little bit further down the line when it comes to the specific drill. There's one where he's upright and he's releasing the ball behind himself. There's one at the very bottom where he's a little flexed over, right? My brother couldn't touch his toes when I met him. When he was a baby, I met him. But in this specific instance, he came back from his freshman year of college, right? If I can't touch my toes, how am I going to be able to get into that flexion-based position? It's impossible. So what I have to do, I have to release it like this. If I stand like this, it's impossible to touch my toes. That's how it goes. Or I'm going to do it, and I'm just going to, no hip hinge, I'm just going to flex it over, right? That's where you see the guys that are super not knee, or super extended with their knees, and they just flex over to their spine, right? In order for me to get into this position, this is an RDL. I need to be able to RDL that front leg, right? If I can't touch my toes, there's a good chance I can't actually shift my weight backwards. And then this is, he's very upright. Now he's over his front side, right? Can't touch his toes, can palm the ground. And all I did was change his posture. If my hips are in front of me and my shoulders are back and I need to go throw a ball that way, my hips have to go backwards, my shoulders have to go forward. It is near impossible for an athlete like this, with that type of motion, that type of posture, to do something like that. So if you get him like this, they're all stacked, he has a better opportunity to go forward. Let's say he's 30 degrees backwards relative to his hips right here. You're asking him to go 30 degrees forward to be neutral and then even further out in front. It's very, very hard to do unless they compensate. And if they're compensating, they're still not going to do it. They'll still be able to throw a strike, but they're going to not do it the way that their body wants them to regulate to do it. Here's a few more examples. What do you see here? Where's the Nationals logo facing? Forward, towards home plate. Where's his arm? Would you just consider that a late arm? I would consider that early chest. Because what we just talked about, this is most important. This is going to tell this what to do. So if I go like this, all I have to do is just go like this, right? When he follows through, chest is still super far forward, right? When he came in for his eval, where was all of his weight? Forward. So you ask him to stand back? Stay back, stay back. Bro, his entire weight, his nose is in front of his toes. You can't physically make a baseball player stay back if their weight is so far in front of them that their nose gets to the door 5 minutes before that rest of their body. This is another example for what you asked before. Shoulder flexion, when some of the coaches do true shoulder flexion, it's going to be an indication of how somebody is going to basically be able to get their arms overhead without cheating, right? You'll go over this more with Kaylee, but this athlete steps across his body, right? When I measured his shoulder range of motion, his true shoulder flexion on his throwing side was a 0. So if it's a 0 and he can't actually lift his arms overhead without compensating, every time he goes to lift it up, he's going to be like this. So when he's trying to throw, he's going to have to step across his body because he's restricted in his ability to basically go like this. So he has to go like this, right? And instead of leaning so far backwards and falling, he goes, shoot, I got to just step forward and then throw across my body. A ton of back pain throughout his career. I got few more good examples. I've met this kid when we did remote stuff. Dude, my elbow hurts. Plays at either College of Charleston or one of those schools in Charleston. Pretty good arm, like a 92, 93 guy. It's hard to see here, but he steps like this. And he goes like this, right? So if I'm stepping like this, and I throw like that, right, I'm leaving my elbow to be exposed. So you would be like, hey, we need to get your arm in a better position. His left leg hip mobility is probably the most restrictive hip mobility I've ever seen. So he's limited. 80 might be generous. He might be closer to like 70, 75. So if he's limited hip flexion, what does he have to do to throw a baseball? He can't get into a go like that. It was like a bony block. He's going to have to open up and cheat his way into that, right? So this is not an arm thing, right? This is I evaled your lower half and your arm because of that. This is a good one that me and Yas actually figured out. This is one of the most elite arms we definitely worked with. What would you say he does off the mound? Does he stay back or does he jump? like a Carter Caps almost, right? Elite arm, Stanford guy, 94, 96 to this day, even throwing like that, right? These are our force plate reports that Yas gives us every single night if we want to on specific people, or every single person that comes in for an eval, these get sent to us automatically, right? All you have to worry about is the bottom left, the asymmetry. Left leg braking force and left leg propulsive forces were significantly more on the left than the right. So that means when he goes down, he loads into his left leg, and when he jumps out of his left leg. Somewhere between like 13 and 8% difference, right? So if I ask this athlete to stay back, this is how he jumps on the force plate. Is that possible? It's gonna be near impossible because he's basically jumping like that. So he's already off his right leg. That's how he throws it basically, right? So me and Spencer did this eval. We did a lot of decel stuff. So he would go off the low box, bam, low box, stick it, low box, stick it, and then the fourth one he would throw. There's a lot of ways that you can teach somebody how to decel into that right leg and teach them how to hold it back, but it's not gonna be on the mountain. It's gonna be in the gym through altitude landings, through maybe do like another ISO hold with the right leg, right? There's, bounce drop, shot puts, like anything that's gonna help him absorb force first and then propulse out of it. Because right now, it's a significant difference in our data set, which means it's a red flag. We need to work on that more. So even if it wasn't a throwing issue, you can see how that would make sense for what you saw, right? Anybody have any questions?
What do you see in an eval that makes you struggle with really distracted moves? Like, is that like on the same page?
I think everybody should do that. But it never hurts to learn how to load or get a better goal suit. I mean, there's definitely non-negotiables that everybody can do, right? Like nobody's ever going to get worse from doing oblique holds or the hip coils or hip airplanes, stuff like that. Those are like low-level movement drills, right? Maybe instead of going, and you probably wouldn't really do this, but this would make sense just because of how many people are in the room. But let's say I'm limited in hip mobility, both sides, ER and IR, and I try to do hip airplane, I'm not going to be able to get it. So if I put my front foot on a slant board, it's going to shift me backwards, which will allow me to get into that a little bit better, right? So this is why maybe somebody does a front foot elevated split squat, right? We talked about this in the beginning. Right now, when I do a split squat, where's my weight? Forward. When I do a Bulgarian, where's my weight? More forward. When I do a front foot elevated, where's my weight? It teaches you how to cheat to get more range of motion. People's Archer, same thing. It shifts you backwards, right? Allows me to cheat the range of motion and then ultimately get more range of motion long term because I'm just putting my pelvis in a better position. The goal is to keep the pelvis and the rib cage stacked. For the most part, if that's done properly, you'll be able to get them in most positions that they want to get to, either in the gym or on the mat. It's hot here. This is my favorite presentation, by the way, guys. Thanks for sitting.